2 Maccabees chapter 13. Menelaus is put to death. In the 149th year, word came to Judas and his men that Antiochus Eupator was coming with a great army against Judea, and with him Lysias his guardian, who had charge of the government. Each of them had a Greek force of 110,000 infantry, 5,300 cavalry, 22 elephants, and 300 chariots armed with scythes. Menelaus also joined them and with utter hypocrisy urged Antiochus on, not for the sake of his country's welfare, but because he thought he would be established in office. But the King of Kings aroused the anger of Antiochus against this scoundrel, and when Lysias informed him that this man was to blame for all the trouble, he ordered them to take him to Beroe and to put him to death by the method which is the custom in that place. For there is a tower in that place, 50 cubits high, full of ashes, and it has a rim running around it, which on all sides inclines precipitously into the ashes. There they all pushed to destruction any man guilty of sacrilege or notorious for other crimes. By such a fate it came about that Menelaus, the lawbreaker, died without even burial in the earth. And this was eminently just, because he had committed many sins against the altar, whose fire and ashes were holy. He met his death in ashes. A battle near the city of Modern. The king was barbarous arrogance, was coming to show to the Jews things far worse than those that had been done in his father's time. But when Judas heard of this, he ordered the people to call upon the Lord day and night, now if ever to help those who were on the point of being deprived of the law and their country and the holy temple, and not to let the people who had just begun to revive fall into the hands of the blasphemous Gentiles. When they had all joined in the same petition and had besought the merciful Lord with weeping and fasting and lying prostrate for 3 days without ceasing, Judas exhorted them and ordered them to stand ready. After consulting privately with the elders, he determined to march out and decide the matter by the help of God before the king's army could enter Judea and get possession of the city. So, committing the decision to the Creator of the world and exhorting his men to fight nobly to the death of the laws, temple, city, country, and commonwealth, he pitched his camp near Modern. He gave his men the watchword, God's victory, and with a picked force of the bravest young men, he attacked the king's pavilion at night and slew as many as 2,000 men in the camp. He stabbed the leading elephant and its rider. In the end, they filled the camp with terror and confusion and withdrew in triumph. This happened just as the day was dawning, because the Lord's help protected him. Antiochus makes treaty with the Jews. The king, having had a taste of the daring of the Jews, tried strategy in attacking their positions. He advanced against Bethsur, a strong fortress of the Jews, was turned back, attacked again, and was defeated. Judas sent in to the garrison whatever was necessary. But Rhodocus, a man from the ranks of the Jews, gave secret information to the enemy. He was sought for, caught, and put in prison. The king negotiated a second time with the people in Bethsur, gave pledges, received theirs, withdrew, attacked Judas and his men, and defeated. He got word that Philip, who had been left in charge of the government, had revolted in Antioch. He was dismayed, called in the Jews, yielded and swore to observe all their rites, settled with them and offered sacrifice, honored the sanctuary, and showed generosity to the holy place. He received Maccabees, left Hegemonides as governor from the Ptolemies to Gerar, and went to Ptolemais. The people of Ptolemais were indignant over the treaty. In fact, they were so angry that they wanted to annul its terms. Lysias took the public platform, made the best possible defense, convinced them, appeased them, gained their goodwill, and set out for Antioch. This is how the king's attack and withdrawal turned out. 2 Maccabees chapter 14. Alcimus speaks against Judas. 3 years later, word came to Judas and his men that Demetrius, the son of Seleucus, had sailed into the harbor of Tripolis with a strong army and a fleet, and had taken possession of the country, having made away with Antiochus and his guardian Lysias. Now a certain Alcimus, who had formerly been high priest but had wilfully defiled himself in the times of separation, realized that there was no way for him to be safe or to have access against to the holy altar, and went to King Demetrius in about the 151st year, presenting to him a crown of gold and a palm, and besides these some of the customary olive branches from the temple. During that day he kept quiet, but he found an opportunity that furthered his mad purpose when he was invited by Demetrius to a meeting of the council and was asked about the disposition and intentions of the Jews. He answered, "Those of the Jews who are called Hasidians, whose leader is Judas Maccabees, are keeping up war and stirring up sedition, and will not let the kingdom attain tranquility. Therefore, I have laid aside my ancestral glory, I mean the high priesthood, and I have now come here, first because I am genuinely concerned for the interests of the king, and second because I have regard also for my fellow citizens. For through the folly of those whom I have mentioned, our whole nation is now in no small misfortune. Since you are acquainted, O king, with the details of this matter, deign to take thought for our country and our hard-pressed nation with the gracious kindness which you show to all. For as long as Judas lives, it is impossible for the government to find peace." When he had said this, the rest of the king's friends who were hostile to Judas quickly inflamed Demetrius still more, and he immediately chose Nicanor, who had been in command of the elephants, appointed him governor of Judea, and sent him off, with orders to kill Judas and scatter his men, and to set up Alcimus as high priest of the greatest temple. And the Gentiles throughout Judea, who had fled before Judas, flocked to join Nicanor, thinking that the misfortunes and calamities of the Jews would mean prosperity for themselves. Nicanor makes friends with Judas. When the Jews heard of Nicanor's coming and the gathering of the Gentiles, they sprinkled dust upon their heads and prayed to him who established his own people forever and always, upholds his own heritage by manifesting himself. At the command of the leader, they set out from there immediately and engaged them in a battle at a village called Dissa. Simon, the brother of Judas, had encountered Nicanor, but had been temporarily checked because of the sudden consternation created by the enemy. Nevertheless, Nicanor, hearing of the valor of Judas and his men and their courage in the battle of the country, shrank from deciding the issue by bloodshed. Therefore he sent Posidonius and Theodotus and Mattathias to give and receive pledges of friendship. When the terms had been fully considered and the leaders had informed the people, and it had appeared that they were of one mind, they agreed to the covenant, and the leaders set a day by which to meet by themselves. A chariot came forward from each army, seats of honor were set in place. Judas posted armed men in readiness at key places to prevent sudden treachery on the part of the enemy. They held the proper conference. Nicanor stayed on in Jerusalem and did nothing out of the way, but dismissed the flocks of people that had gathered, and he kept Judas always in his presence. He was warmly attached to the man, and he urged him to marry and have children. So he married, settled down, and shared the common life. Nicanor turns against Judas. But when Alcimus noticed their goodwill for one another, he took the covenant that had been made and went to Demetrius. He told him that Nicanor was disloyal to the government, for he had appointed that conspirator against the kingdom, Judas, to be his successor. The king became excited and provoked by the false accusations of that depraved man, wrote to Nicanor stating that he was displeased with the covenant and commanding him to send Maccabees to Antioch as a prisoner without delay. When this message came to Nicanor, he was troubled and grieved that he had to annul their agreement when the man had done no wrong. Since it was not possible to oppose the king, he watched for an opportunity to accomplish this by a stratagem. But Maccabees, noticing that Nicanor was more austere in his dealings with him and was meeting him more rudely than had been his custom, concluded that this austerity did not spring from the best motives. So he gathered not a few of his men and went into hiding from Nicanor. When the latter became aware that he had been cleverly outwitted by the man, he went to the great and holy temple while the priests were offering the customary sacrifices and commanded them to hand the man over. And when they declared on oath that they did not know where the man was whom he sought, he just stretched out his right hand towards the sanctuary and swore his oath. If you do not hand Judas over to me as a prisoner, I will level this present of God to the ground and tear down the altar, and I will build here a splendid temple to Dionysus. Having said this, he went away. Then the priests stretched forth their hands towards heaven and called upon the constant defender of our nation in these words: O Lord of all, who has need of nothing, thou wast pleased that there be a temple for thy habitation among us. So now, O Holy One, Lord of all holiness, keep undefiled forever this house that has been so recently purified. Rhesus dies for his country. A certain Rhesus, one of the elders of Jerusalem, was denounced to Nicanor as a man who loved his fellow citizens and was very well thought of, and for his goodwill was called Father of the Jews. For in former times, when there was no mingling with the Gentiles, he had been accused of Judaism, and for Judaism he had with all zeal risked body and life. Nicanor, wishing to exhibit the enmity which he had for the Jews, sent more than 500 soldiers to arrest him, for he thought that by arresting him he would do them an injury. When the troops were about to capture the tower and were forcing the door of the courtyard, they ordered that fire be brought and the doors burned. Being surrounded, Rhesus fell upon his own sword, preferring to die nobly rather than to fall into the hands of the sinners and suffer outrages unworthy of his noble birth. But in the heat of the struggle, he did not hit exactly, and the crowd was now rushing in through the doors. He bravely ran up and on the wall and manfully threw himself down into the crowd. But as they quickly drew back, a space opened and he fell in the middle of the empty space. Still alive and aflame with anger, he rose, and though his blood gushed forth and his wounds were severe, he ran through the crowd, and standing upon a steep rock, with his blood now completely drained from him, he tore out his entrails, took them with both hands, and hurled them at the crowd, calling upon the Lord of life and spirit to give them back to him again. This was the manner of his death. 2 Maccabees chapter 15. Nicanor's arrogance. When Nicanor heard that Judas and his men were in the region of Samaria, he made plans to attack them with complete safety on that day of rest. And when the Jews who were compelled to follow him said, "Do not destroy so savagely and barbarously, but show respect for the day which he who sees all things has honored and hallowed above other days," and thrice accursed wretch asked if there were a sovereign in heaven who had commanded the keeping of the Sabbath day. And when they declared, "It is the living Lord himself, the sovereign in heaven, who ordered us to observe the seventh day," he replied, "And I am a sovereign also on earth, and I command you to take up arms and finish the king's business." Nevertheless, he did not succeed in carrying out his abominable design. Judas prepares the Jews for battle. This Nicanor, in his utter boastfulness and arrogance, had determined to erect a public monument of victory over Judas and his men. But Maccabees did not cease to trust with all confidence that he would get help from the Lord. And he exhorted his men not to hear the attack of the Gentiles, but to keep in mind the former times when help had come to them from heaven, and now to look for the victory which the Almighty would give them. Encouraging them from the law and the prophets, and reminding them also of the struggles they had won, he made them the more eager, and when he had aroused their courage, he gave his orders, at the same time pointing out the perfidy of the Gentiles and the violation of oaths. He armed each of them not so much with confidence in shields and spears as with the inspiration of brave words, and he cheered them all by relating a dream, a sort of vision, which was worthy of belief. What he saw was this: Onias, who had been high priest, a noble and good man of modest bearing and gentle manner, one who spoke fittingly and had been trained from childhood in all that belongs to excellence, was praying with outstretched hands for the whole body of the Jews. Then likewise a man appeared distinguished by his grey hair and dignity, and of marvellous majesty and authority. And Onias spoke, saying, This is a man who loves the brethren and prays much for the people and the holy city, Jeremiah, the prophet of God. Jeremiah stretched out his right hand and gave to Judas a golden sword, and as he gave it, he addressed this thus: Take this holy sword, a gift from God, with which you will strike down your adversaries. Encouraged by the words of Judas, so noble and so effective in arousing valor and awakening manliness in the souls of the young, they determined not to carry on a campaign, but to attack bravely and to decide the matter by fighting hand to hand with all courage, because the city and the sanctuary and the temple were in danger. Their concern for wives and children, and also for brethren and relatives, lay upon them less heavily than greatest and first fear was for the consecrated sanctuary. And those who were to remain in the city were in no little distress, being anxious over the encounter in the open country. The defeat and death of Nicanor. When all were now looking forward to the coming decision, and the enemy was already close at hand with their army drawn up for battle, the elephants strategically stationed and the cavalry deployed on the flanks, Maccabees, perceiving the hosts that were before him and the varied supply of arms and the savagery of the elephants, stretched out his hands towards heaven and called upon the Lord who works wonders. For he knew that it is not by arms, but as the Lord decides, that he gains the victory for those who deserve it. And he called upon him in these words: O Lord, thou didst send thy angel in the time of Hezekiah, king of Judea, and he slew fully 185,000 in the camp of Sennacherib. So now, O sovereign of the heavens, send a good angel to carry terror and trembling before us. By the might of thy arm, may these blasphemers who come against thy holy people be struck down. With these words, he ended his prayer. Nicanor and his men advanced with trumpets and battle songs, and Judas and his men met the enemy in battle with invocation to the God and prayers. So the fighting with their hands and praying to God in their hearts, they laid low no less than 35,000 men and were greatly gladdened by God's manifestation. When the action was over and they were returning with joy, they recognized Nicanor lying dead in full armor. Then there was shouting and tumult, and they blessed the sovereign Lord in the language of their fathers. And the man who was ever in body and soul and defender of his fellow citizens, the man who maintained his youthful good will towards his countrymen, ordered them to cut off Nicanor's head and arm and carry them to Jerusalem. And when he arrived there and he had called his countrymen together and stationed the priests before the altar, he said for those who were in the citadel, he showed them the vile Nicanor's head and that profane man's arm, which had been boastfully stretched out against the holy house of the Almighty. And he cut out the tongue of the ungodly Nicanor and said that he would give it piecemeal to the birds and hang up these rewards of his folly opposite the sanctuary. And they all, looking to heaven, blessed the Lord, who had manifested himself, saying, Blessed is he who has kept his own place undefiled. And he hung Nicanor's head from the citadel, a clear and conspicuous sign to every one of the help of the Lord. And they all decreed by public vote never to let this day go unobserved, but to celebrate the 13th day of the 12th month, which is called Adar in the Syrian language, the day before Mordecai's Day. The compiler's epilogue. This then is how matters turned out with Nicanor, and from that time the city has been in the possession of the Hebrews. So I too will here end my story. If it is well told and to the point, that is what I myself desired. If it is poorly done and mediocre, that was the best I could do. For just as it is harmful to drink wine alone, or again to drink water alone, while wine mixed with water is sweet and delicious and enhances one's enjoyment, so also the style of the story delights the ears of those who read the work, and here will be the end.